You're reminding me of a. So I picked up a book a while ago. I haven't read it yet because I just do that, where I buy books intending to.
You 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 read more of those books than I do.
I know, like I'm. I've tipped the scale. I think I've read about a third of my library at this point. It used to be half, and now I'm purchasing more than I can keep up with. But I will read them all eventually. I always do. Uh, but one of them is about the what is it called? It's something like the power or the something along the lines of like the power of regret or like the usefulness of regret or something. It centers around regret and how it affects us, and what we can do with it as a an emotion. I guess regret is an emotion. Yeah,
Until we work through it, it's an emotion.
right. Yeah, yeah.
For
Um,
for lack of a better term.
right. It is a feeling that we get right based on our actions.
Yeah.
So so yeah. Uh, no, and man, so I started doing. I didn't. Did I do a discourse? No, I didn't do a discourse this time on goodness, but I did jot down some notes, my thoughts for the on the nature of good.
I'm 100% banking on my previous obsession with it. So
That's
I,
okay. No,
I
honestly, that's these conversations kind of need to go that way sometimes. Like where you just kind of they because you and I are organic conversationalists.
mm,
We don't debate. Like I don't come with my set of stuff, and you come with your set of
well,
stuff, and then
at least
you would absolutely demolish me in a debate. First of all, I'm not a debater.
it's unfortunately because I've studied rhetoric, which as a philosopher, it upsets me how many conversations I could win through rhetoric alone because it shouldn't win. But for someone who doesn't know rhetoric, it's an easy win.
It sure is, yeah, because folks aren't prepared to dive any deeper than their initial opinion of something.
Well, they feel something and then they talk and they're like, okay, well, I know how I feel, so that must be being communicated. It's like, no, you got to learn to communicate first of all in a detailed way what you feel,
Mhm.
but depending on the context, you also want to then layer that with what you need to do to get a result that you're aiming for.
You do. That's we're dancing around something that I had kind of thought of earlier today. Even was so much of what we talk about, you and I talk about, like we had, the discourse on, oh God, what did we just talk about?
Today
We've
or
talked
another
about
day.
stuff like skill sets. We've talked about happiness. We've talked about all those things. Uh, yeah, mastery or development of self, whatever you want to call it.
That one was
Um,
rough, but
it was, but that's because that's too broad of a topic.
yeah.
Like
Well,
we're talking about things like goodness and happiness, but mastery, that's like that's kind
we
of
didn't
all
even pick
encompassing.
mastery. We said we're gonna move in this direction, and then we kept trying to call it mastery. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we want to do that, we should probably actually pin down a term and then go around that because it's
Yeah.
we picked too broad of a concept and refused to narrow it in a way. So that's a
Lesson
lesson
learned.
learned. Yeah. No regrets on that. I feel like it was still a useful conversation, if not as a conversationalist rather than a listener, perhaps, but
Mhm.
useful conversation. Uh, all of its practice. But so much of what I'm going to make the prediction of so much of what we're going to be talking about in the future and now is it all boils down to choices that we make, uh, and sticking to those choices because everything's made up. Everything's made up. So we have to make up something and stick with that in order for it to be real, essentially. Because you can change your mind at any point at all. The most devout, religious person could change their mind.
All right, then we got to dive in the deep end because yeah, I see what you're saying with that.
Right.
I think there's topics that won't fall into that pitfall of uh, not dissolution. I mean that probably works. Dissolution, yeah, because it's the
That's
dissolve
what it
down,
is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
whatever. But it can't be dissolved down to that, even though a lot of our anything that deals with the improvement of self or improvement of society is going to fall down to that. I think there's topics that won't, but okay, so it's about choices. You can change your choices. So how do you keep congruent choices? Well, in theory, you make your choices based on what's good.
Right. But that's a catch-22.
And here we go.
All right. And the judge has started the timer. So it's a catch-22, at least until we prove it otherwise. Because we make our choices based on what's good, but we choose what's good. Right?
Yeah. Well, you say we choose what's good, but even with a lot of people doing the big push against the postmodernist concept of like you get to pick your reality, and there's a push against that with like, well, there's biology, right? So we hear it a lot with the male, female, whatever. So there's that to it, but to the point with that is the other argument is that well, masculinity and femininity, the all gender as a whole is a social construct, and they rebel against that, and they're like, no, not a social construct, it's biological, whatever. But you can't deny cultural and social education or development in the person. The concept of good, I don't think unless you go on a path where you risk losing the concept of good, typically you're given the concept of good through your cultural narrative.
Mhm.
So I think for the average person, they don't choose good. They can choose. But the average person culturally is given some definition and they stick with that. Or they're given one in their youth, but then they find just only a secondary one, which they're still given. They don't find, they're given, and then they choose that secondary one. You see that a lot with the college academic style
Sure.
development.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny. So this morning I spent any free time I get, at least in mornings, I spend doing two things. I drink coffee and I read books. Like that's what I do on like mornings off. That's a thing I've done for years and years, and I'll never stop doing it. Today's topic, amongst other things, was um, music cognition, kind of a basics, a primer on the psychology of music. Uh, and there was a lot of interplay between because music and goodness and evil and all these kinds of things are, we know they are, but to find them is tricky. Uh, and where I found a really good cross between the two, a nice cross section, because you can replace certain words. Some things translate really well. You
Mhm.
can replace music with goodness and or whatever and see what happens. So basically, where did I find that? In page 49. Let me read you a thing because it's just gonna like help. You can say your words. I need to say other people's words to make sense.
You're a curator.
Yeah, a synthesizer, a curator, whatever it is. Uh, so it's essentially so I kind of read this whole chapter, and this is music as the chapter was entitled Music as Sound, because a lot of the argument for music is, well, what is music? Well, music is organized sound. Not really. Not all music is sound in a way, but not all sound is music. Um, and this sentence or this paragraph really kind of clicked with me. It's in summary, music is not sound; it is listening to sound. Right? Like, because sound is in nature, sound just is. But the perceiver, the receiver of that sound, chooses that it's a very postmodern concept, as you might come to.
Yeah, but
Uh,
it's also, I think about that all the time when we talk about what makes music, because I can go on Spotify and play a playlist of jungle sounds,
Mhm.
and on the one hand, it's defined as jungle sounds, but on the other hand, it's I'm listening to it as music, and it's as you pointed out, it's the listening to it as
Yeah,
music.
yeah. The birds don't consider it music. The dolphins, the whales, the gorillas, not music to them. That's not. They didn't choose for that to be their expression, right? The birds are literally screaming, "Fuck me, fuck me, fuck me," like,
Oh, nature.
right. All those things we're listening to, oh, they're all trying to get laid, man. More or less. That's a very distilled point, but
Technically correct.
technically correct. Uh, so like, and we listen to bird song and find it beautiful, but the birds aren't. That's just they're screaming. They're not. They're not doing anything other than what they naturally do. Uh,
Well, but you could argue there's like they're trying to. You could argue it's music in the same way that R&B music, which is fuck me music, is the same thing, right? Like I'm trying to coax you into, I'm trying to coax somebody into getting laid with me, but there's ways to do it, right? There's levels to it. So you could still argue that they're trying to beautify something that like the Komodo dragon just doesn't bother
it's true. It's true. I'll counter your point though with it's more an expression. So our human music, right, is our expression of wanting to have sex. If we're going to use that
with.
example, it's our expression of the want to do so. Not even it's not a scientifically like or evolutionarily designed like if I wiggle the air in just such a way, it will arouse the
Oh,
female.
yeah.
All that kind
That's
of stuff.
yeah, because there's the strange uniformity of as a species of bird, you saying this particular set best, and that's how you get laid.
Pretty much.
For no
Pretty much.
particular reason other than that's what your species does.
Yeah, that's what y'all hear. That's what your bird species hears. Yes. So it is. It's both the music heard and the musical hearer are needed if we are to understand what makes the music. This is why all that stuff. Then go on. This is entitled "The Basics," and I can feel my frontal cortex like pulsing when I read this thing.
The basics are the key to mastery. Not to touch on that topic again, but
It's true, but man, like the funny thing is, these are not. I could not hand this to like a high schooler and like, oh, here's the basics of
Mhm.
the psychology of music. This is like more profound than what a lot of people would be able to consider the basics. But it's also written by I think this is a Nordic author, and they're generally smarter than everyone else. So
So is the premise you're trying to get across that goodness is in the observer?
yeah, uh, here's what I wrote. Goodness is not found in nature. Beauty is in the eye of beholder, music is in the ear of the listener, and goodness is in the perception of the perceiver. It's defined by the choices we make and our ability to follow through with them. Before one can decide what is good, one must have decided on a code of ethics, morals, priorities, standards. It's, you name it,
Mhm.
in order to measure, against. So, does it meet the standard of what you consider good? So, mathematically speaking, good is more of a side effect than a like. It's a quality, not necessarily a state of being. I don't know. So that's what I explained to myself. I know that's not entirely whole.
But
This is
that
a
that
this is this is a partial thought that I was
yeah,
kind of
but that's very
parsing
much
out.
the experiential concept of good.
Hmm. Yes. So then, what is the because we are in essence the way I define humans as a giant psychology nerd is that we are the most rational beings on this earth. We are that's what our brain either developed to be or was designed to be. It doesn't even matter which one of those people believe. It's what we are. Uh, we are the most rational species. We have the highest cognitive function on the earth. But we are we are sensory creatures first, and then emotional creatures second, and then rational creatures,
Mm,
especially based on our biological timeline going back, however long.
right.
Uh, we feel with our body, we perceive, and then we feel, and then we rationalize in that order. Most of that is based on survival because you can't really think about, oh, I'm probably going to get eaten now. No, you need to.
Yeah.
You need to survive. You can think about how you almost were just eaten once you're in the clear,
Mm,
but you feel that your emotion kicks in, and a lot of people stop there, and they rationalize that later. You and I work in customer service. We see this happening. It is
mm,
a profound experiment in psychology. is
yeah.
that is that we are emotional beings first. We are rational thinkers, but we are emotional beings.
Yes. Yeah.
We use yeah,
Saying we're the most rational animal is a very low bar.
it is, but
Because we're
not untrue.
we're not the only, but we're almost the only. So it's not like we're in a field of rational creatures. And it's like we've beaten all these ones. It's like, well, dolphins seem somewhat rational. They murder other things for fun, which seems to be you have to say, well, it's funny, which is a rational thought, ironically. So, but the bar's pretty low, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. No, it's true. It really is.
but
Uh,
so you're talking about good again experientially, right? So as an individual trying to figure out what is good, specifically in contrast to what is bad. That's where you're currently using the word good. Would that be a accurate assessment?
essentially, it's measuring using culture, uh, using the stuff you talked about. You've been given this idea or this set of social constructs uh, to help. You've been given a compass that points towards good.
Mhm.
If you had to make the compass, what would that look like? You know?
Right. Well, but because that comes into the fact that similar to happiness, for me, there's uh, a dichotomy in the term good or goodness that is, on the one hand, there's the philosophical take, and on the other hand, there's the experiential take, a very parallel to the concept of happiness, where if you try to figure it out your own, you'll either choose goodness based on some kind of religion, some kind of deism or uh, theology
Sure.
that dictates to you, or if you remove all concept of theology, the only other choice is the philosophical concept of goodness, which takes us back to the Stoics, where because we're probably going to talk about them a lot with a lot of these topics, is that and the Stoics weren't the first to think of this, but the the notion of choosing good over bad is fundamentally flawed because there's an assumption that there's a bad. But if you take away everything and you try and figure out what is good, the first thing you realize is, well, there can't be any bad because nature can't do anything contrary to itself. So that means everything has to be good fundamentally, but good fundamentally is different than good to the individual. But the first thing you have to accept is that there can't be a fundamental bad, which is very different than the cultural or religious uh, narrative and moral compass you're given that has to distinguish bad, um, specifically as a fundamental bad. There's like I said, I've talked to humanists who are like, I accept the premise that to nature all is good, but to me, a human, I take on the subjectivity that nature has given me, understanding that contrast, and because it's bad for me, a human, I consider it bad when within my moral compass. Now, philosophically, I understand that's not bad, but morally, I understand it's bad. So you can still make that separation,
Mhm.
um, but you're doing it in spite of reality. That's where it gets tricky.
Okay. So I get everything you're saying.
Mhm.
What can you dive into? So you're the philosopher, right? I've dabbled, I've touched philosophy, but you're actually a philosopher. Um, and most of my philosophy has come from just early exploration of my teens, and then I switched mainly to psychology, which is the
More,
perception of philosophy
more
rather than
practical. It's much more practical.
equally as frustrating though.
Yeah.
But so can you? I'm going to ask a very big question, which is why I'm like
Go.
faltering in it. Can you define or help me to understand? Maybe is a better way to ask. Can you help me to understand the philosophical concept of good?
Well, like I said, it's simple as this. If you take away theology, it's can nature do anything not true to itself? Because if nature is being true to itself, then everything is good by nature's terms, right?
Hmm.
So that's the
Hmm.
non-theological concept. The uh, the stream of uh, esoteric religious sentiment and understanding that goes through the religions uh, has that same concept. It's why in uh, non political religious organizations, you don't see as much of a devil figure, or the devil figure is redeemed because God, whatever this or whatever the supreme force is, if God created the devil can't be bad because it's part of the plan. And
Right.
everything that said supreme power does has to be fundamentally good because that supreme power can't do anything outside of what is good if it is supreme truly. It gets complicated with the metaphysics of the religion. So if we just look at it through the nature concept, there's things that are bad for you as an individual, but as far as nature is concerned, it's functioning perfectly fine.
Oh,
uh,
sure. Okay. I've thought about that a lot. Like a meteor would be bad for us.
as
But
humans.
right, as humans. But space is pretty big. It doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, and it gets tricky because even within the philosophical lineage of dealing with that concept, um, you run into the trouble of, okay, so it's the everything's permitted kind of thing, but that gets a little tricky.
Mhm.
But if there wasn't, and atheists kind of lean on this a little bit, and they struggle with it because it's really hard. But if there wasn't uh, a direction for nature, it's really hard to argue life would have been created at all. You can say that it's entirely random, but why? And that's a loaded question, right? Like we're supposing a purpose in the sphere where we want to understand that as humans, but there could be none. But even in the most objective take on it, if there wasn't anything at all to it, it could just have been nothing. So there's something there, and defining that is a nightmare. Um, so on the one hand, nothing nature does can be bad, but yet it seems to move in a direction. Now that direction could even be a random direction. That's fine, but it's trying to do something. It
Mhm.
seems. So we can say, okay, there maybe there is something to put parameters on it because nature seems to be trying to do this. It doesn't care if it reaches the goal, um, but it still seems to be moving that way. And that's the atheist trouble of trying to work with a nature that really doesn't care because everything nature does, it's like I'm happy with it. Like it did, it
Right.
didn't, whatever. But at the same time, as part of the result of nature, we can say as a result of that nature, well, you got here with this thing and I want to know, so there must be some reason I want to know, right? And that's where you get to
Right.
really the tricky part of that thing of everything has to be good because nature can't do bad, but nature can't do bad. Why would it create a creature that has to struggle with it?
Yeah, and that well, so that actually brings to mind a question I brought up to myself earlier was before this call, was like, so we have. I guess I'm stuck on the experiential part of it, but I bet you can
Much
tie
more
this in.
practical. Again, much more
Yeah,
practical.
yeah. But I also bet that this has a micro macro, level to it that we can dig into. How the concept of like what is good doesn't always translate to pleasurable.
Yeah.
It rarely does it. When we talk about you have to do what's good for you, we often mean we have to do something unpleasurable for
Hmm.
for that action, for that progression towards XYZ. Doesn't matter
Yeah.
what it is. But to kind of piggyback off of what you said, it's moving some way, which must be good. So when we have to do things that are good for us, quote unquote, are good for us, it's generally stuff we don't feel like doing, but we know it will propel us in the direction that is good.
Hmm.
So it's one of those things of, I guess we do intrinsically know that, even if we don't want to admit it, or even if we know that we know it, but we all kind of feel that trajectory in a way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. That there's emotion, and everybody feels it. How we
Hmm.
deal with that is entirely unique to the experience and the set of symbols and language we have to translate that experience.
Surely, surely. Yeah. Because I mean, there's just so many oh, what's the word? Not oxymorons, the things that like out define themselves.
Paradox.
Yeah, there's a lot of those.
But to like put the point in why we're talking about this. So there's this universal experience. Well, I say universal, but it has to be because as a conscious being, there is a direction, and you experience that as a conscious being because you're literally the result of it, and you're trying to process that. But you can only process it within terms of your cultural understanding, your language understanding, and your use of philosophical symbols. And the term good is not a great symbol to use, unfortunately.
right. No, and we're getting into. So I'm kind of a pragmatist with these kinds of concepts, because so many of us aren't equipped to even consider this. And there's good on all sorts of levels, right? Are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yeah, yep.
So I put great emphasis on that whenever I speak to people about most things, because we talk about higher ideals and all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, we got to check some boxes first, which is why I rally against I have this huge issue with like the student debt crisis and the way that a lot of taxes I have a lot of issues with things. Uh, very profound thought. And I have a lot of issues with things. But what I mean is, we talk about these higher concepts, be it politically, philosophically, um, economically. We talk about these higher concepts that we would like to see and achieve, but it's like we got to take care of some stuff first. We got to you know, uh, we talk about it a lot, just offhandedly, despite your political leanings, whoever's political leanings, it's kind of shown that everyone kind of has to have a good basis before they can start to change things for the better. Like they have to have some grounding, some stability
Yeah,
before.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
And that's oh, go on.
No, and so there are levels of good, and you can check off all those. Like the Maslow has this pyramid, um, of like you need food and shelter, like survival, followed by and it creeps up towards comfort, creeps up towards like the
Creative,
top one. Yeah, the top one is self actualization, where you can actually.
which was added later.
Yeah.
Self-actualization wasn't considered a need.
No, it but it becomes it's for the intellectual who has everything, right? Like
Not even for the intellectual, it's for the wealthy person who has everything. But if they haven't figured out how, like it's a trope of the rich person who can't buy their own happiness, right? Because
right.
they never figured out how to give their life meaning other than the pursuit. So they
Yeah.
can never achieve a satisfaction.
Exactly. Yeah. So is that the highest good one can achieve? Maybe, maybe not. But there are levels of personal good you need to reach first, you know.
And this is where I think a conversation about good will do good. Well, but
It
because
will provide benefit. Yeah.
yeah, yes, but there's like I said, there's things about the English language I like. There's things I don't like. The synonyms I like. Um, but yeah, because even in the concept of the Stoic, Zen, Taoist, no, there's no bad. There's no fundamentally bad, which if you're trying to be happy, a critical thing to understand.
Right.
But if you're trying to live, you need to parameterize,
Hmm.
for lack of a better word. Um, but even with the most atheistic, just observational understanding of what reality looks like I said, we can see that there's this direction. Maybe there's no meaning to the direction other than it's like this way. Um, but we can say that all the mammals do well with food and shelter. Like that,
Hmm.
there's there's things you can argue about what the great purpose is, but the concept that everybody benefits from having a sense of stability, especially humans, I don't see how that could possibly be debated. And like, okay, I correct that. I understand the premise of giving people the opportunity to fail creates real risk. Um, I just life, even when it's going well, is so much suffering. I don't know if you need to make the bottom fall out to motivate people.
No, it's absolutely true. It is. It's you know, because I think the main argument, right? I don't think anyone denies that one needs the basic necessities to achieve, to, you know, have the basic needs met in order to achieve certain goals that you set for yourself, or, you know, for the good, whatever you want to say about it. The main argument, I guess, that I hear is the fact that it needs to be earned. And I'm not sure quite where this came from necessarily. Um,
to
because we are
to
that's a
clarify, you're talking about food and shelter needs to be earned.
a lot of the time, yeah, any of this, like
Ah,
anything better than you, it's like it's as if we don't deserve anything. It's anything better than you have needs
but
to be earned
but that makes sense, right? Like I know you
in a
know
way.
that too. And
In a way, but the thing is we seem to block each other like we're not. It's the crabs in a bucket analogy, if you're
yeah,
familiar with that. Yeah.
yeah, and I my take on that is ironically conservative. I would throw this back in their own faces, right? That yes, it needs to be earned. Your fucking ancestors earned it. They earned your right to sit on your ass and eat food under a fucking roof. We've done it
Right.
for thousands of years. We have blood, sweat, and tears. And unless all of psychology is wrong, because people can't, again, we're talking about food and shelter. People are like, oh, they'll spend money on whatever. No, you give people a stipend that can only be used for food and a stipend that can only be used for shelter. If they want a TV, if they want an Xbox, if they want Netflix, if they want any of that stuff, make them join the market or whatever it is.
Earn that. Yeah.
Yeah, but even if you're just saying earn, we have thousands of dead humans that have earned the privilege of basic comfort.
Right.
That's a conservative notion. The concept of your ancestors and your lineage. That's not a progressive thing. That's a conservative thing.
Right.
I shouldn't have to say that the average person deserves that because their grandparents, their great grandparents suffered for that. Like
Right.
so they have. Here's the thing. I agree. The concept that somebody just deserves it by being born. Fuck no. The concept that they're born after dozens of generations trying to give them just that. That's different.
Sure. So is it deserved? Maybe not. Is it inherited? Most definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Somebody earned it.
Somebody earned it.
Which is
Somebody
my
earned
same
it.
which is my
Yeah.
same thing with wealth. Like people get all picky about the wealth thing, like, oh, like they're born into wealth. Somebody had to earn that. Somebody
Right.
had to do the work. It's like, oh, then it's like, oh, well, they cheated. Doesn't matter. They were smarter than like that's an intelligence thing. Oh, I'm sorry, they outsmarted people, but that's a sign of intelligence. They got paid for being intelligent. Do their descendants deserve that? Again, maybe not deserve, but their their intelligent ancestor earned them the right to that. Now,
Right.
once you put into a society, it gets more complicated, but you can't with the good thing, food and shelter. There's not a good argument against just giving
Right.
everybody that.
And even the folks you were just talking about, the generational wealth, all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, yeah, they're higher up in the pyramid now. They're up in the hierarchy of needs.
Mhm.
Like they have more good things going for them. Um, that raises a number of questions. Like, is it then their responsibility to achieve the greatest good possible? Because a lot of them don't by by a lot of moral and ethical standards. But uh, and is it it's the same thing as the starving artist. Like that's not good, but we've somehow idealized it. We've romanticized it as a good thing because you're suffering for a purpose.
Mhm.
But that's not. No, that's anyone who has been a starving artist knows that that's not the way it should be.
But this is where it gets tricky, right? Is I stand by my kind of concept that if you let it stabilize, people will find a way to suffer. I think that's more my point.
Will they find a way to suffer, or will they? Well, I think I'm about to be redundant with what you said, but do they find a way to suffer, or do they cause suffering upon one another? Like,
It's the same thing, right? We
yeah,
we
exactly.
we
Yeah,
create our own meaning, but
yeah,
uh, I understand where people come from. Where it's like if you didn't have the opportunity for rags to riches stories, you wouldn't have the rags to riches stories, right? Like some of the most when it comes to meteoric rise and power and fame, it came from people that had to fear a bottom out, right? Like
mhm,
there was no safety net.
right.
That's where you get those extremes. But my thing would be, do you think it's healthy for a human to have to go to the see, no, I walk myself into this is where it gets tricky. Does the human have to face the deepest, darkest depths in order to experience the highest highs? Because like that's a struggle with depression. People that struggle with depression, it's bipolar. But with artists, if you make it too comfortable, they don't produce the same art. And again, you could like I kind of stand by the fact that they'll find some suffering because you can never get rid of the suffering, but I don't know.
A lot,
Maybe,
a lot of
maybe
them do find it. Um, that's a tricky one. I mean,
I think I got a good way to put it if you want to riff off of this.
okay,
Is it good to take away the jungle? Because that's what you're trying to do, right?
to take away the jungle.
To take away the like the wilderness.
So yeah, so
That's
we're
what taking
coming.
the risk of food and shelter is. Food and shelter finding food and shelter is jungle. That's wilderness. If you take that away, you're taking away the jungle out of the human experience.
Potentially. Human history has proven otherwise, right? Like, you wouldn't be in a house with a computer had the jungle not been taken away eventually.
No, because computers were built in war.
True, I guess so. A jungle scenario, yeah, a
See,
jungle of sorts.
this is where it gets
So
tricky.
so here's where the path diverges in the wood. So there are two ways that, let's call it, innovation. This kind of diverges from good, perhaps a little bit, but in the term of growth, let's say growth is good. Um, Development, all that kind of stuff. Let's term that for now as good. Um, there are kind of two. There's a fork in the road there. So one path is necessity breeds innovation. We've all heard that phrase or some iteration of it. Where yeah, war. We need to do this. Find a way to do this. they found a way to do this. And that has, sprung things like, microwaves and the atomic bomb.
And the internet.
Yeah, all of that stuff, all of it. So much has come from conflict about we need to do this now before someone else figures something out that will, cause us more suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So, what was it? What was the phrase I just used? Necessity breeds, yeah. Necessity breeds invention or innovation. Yeah, that's one part. The other part is the creative aspect of things. So it's a bit of both at all times, but the other fork in the road, the other direction, is you need a safe, quote unquote, safe space in which to explore your ideas. Because a lot of the time it's like, so it's either crunch time, like
well, and
you write an essay one of two ways: at the very last second, or with plenty of time and lots of research. Either can get an A.
And to make it clear to the Western audience, democracy happened not due to the conflict; it happened due to the luxury of time and resource.
Exactly, right.
And not even
it caused a conflict.
Yeah, not even. And to make sure it's clear because democracy no longer means democratic republic, the concept of representative government, all that whole, it isn't the will of the strong, it's the will of the group. And whether you call that democratic, whether you do it through a representation republic, but that concept of representation of the population as the ruling thing didn't happen because war was happening. It happened because there was enough time to be like, what would be the best?
Right. They had time to think about it. Yeah. Most of the great philosophers did nothing but sit around and think about it. Right. There are no war philosophers.
But they did all get conquered by the people that didn't do that. But yet here America is. Yeah. That's what the testament of America is, right? Like we're the continued, you can argue not successfully, and I think that's a fair critique, but regardless, we were started on that same mode of thought. So even being a conquered nation, the idea survived, at least idealistically.
Yeah. And so then I guess that begs the question, like, is there, also there's Sun Tzu. So there is at least one war philosopher, but he also had lots of time to sit around and think.
Well, and Socrates was a war hero. So, I mean, we're
right.
going to be struggling with that.
But again, they didn't necessarily philosophize about, like, they didn't do it in the moment, right? They probably did it and then they went back and had time to reflect. That's really what it is.
Well, because the knight class was a luxury class.
Certainly. I talk about that. I'm a black belt in Filipino martial arts. That is not a luxury martial art. Mm-hmm. That is you go out there, you might get stabbed. Here's how to wield a knife. Here's how to defend against a knife. We'll learn how to kick and punch tomorrow. But for now, here's how to defend against a knife.
Whereas, oh, go on.
No, exactly what you're about to say. In the knight classes, the samurai, the nobility of Korea, China, all of that, punch and kick first, learn respect for all that stuff, learn about all the formality of it all, and then I'll hand you a weapon and we'll figure that out. There was time to come up with all that, which is why those are the philosophical arts.
Which I think we're getting to the core here, that necessity breeds innovation. Innovation isn't necessarily good. I think that's what we're getting at. That just innovating out of necessity isn't a good thing, because what philosophically stands as good isn't done because there's warriors at the door. It's because there's respect amongst the warriors.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. And we can use, I mean, the Taoists use this example of nature all the time with this kind of concept. Like, you drop a pebble into still water with like sand at the bottom. They always use that one. You drop a rock into that, it gets all muddy and cloudy, and then eventually it settles back down. Like that's nature, that's natural. So, and if we're going by the philosophical concept of good, that is good, right? it happens and then it calms down, which also happens. It's all
Mhm.
happening.
Yeah, and that's where it gets tricky with the human experience because tinker with we can never work outside of nature, but we can tinker with the levels nature works with. And that's why we have to have these conversations.
Yeah,
Because we can drop more pebbles, or we can accept the pebbles drop and make use of the clear water.
we invented catapults. We can hurl pebbles for miles.
uh, it was more efficient to send manure or dead bodies, but yes, rocks were
That's true.
okay.
I guess rocks are more of the trebuchet, which
Yeah,
is the superior siege engine, according to all of Reddit.
yeah. Well,
It's a great time.
that's just because if you know a trebuchet, you played some kind of real-time strategy game in your youth.
True. Or if you've just yeah, or if you're any sort of physicist whatsoever, you're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
For range, yeah. I mean, you're a nerd. If you if you think that's a good weapon, you're a nerd. That's all.
A nerd who's correct, as
Yeah.
most nerds are. But yeah, and that's a whole that's just the thing. Like nature is this constant, not battle, it's just constant trading, I guess, of
But
chaos versus
but
stillness.
this was the book I started writing close to a decade ago. Holy shit. Um and eventually I'll finish, but part of my obsession with it is that nature seems to seek an equilibrium against itself. That
An equal wait, that's is that a paradox? An equilibrium against itself.
yeah, because nature is organized chaos. But the important part is the organization, not the chaos. Um, because the chaos would mean that there wouldn't be anything distinguishable. So it's the organization that makes nature as we know it um, what it is. So it's constantly trying to create this equilibrium, but the tools it works with, it's rolling dice. So
That is a good point, because that is what our sciences are truly for. We are, because scientists discover things. They don't necessarily, some create, but they usually create by discovering the properties of things and then being able to combine them.
mhm.
So scientists are almost like, I don't know, super in-depth
Maybe
historians or something like,
every scientist is an archaeologist, just not everyone's digging in the dirt. Some are digging in math, some are digging in
right.
like physics, but they're
No,
they're
it's
all
true. It's
digging
true.
to find an answer that already exists. They're not trying
Yes.
to create the answer.
So what they're doing, what we're all doing, is just discovering. Pythagoras did this with music, Western tonal music, anyways. But uh, we are discovering the order, how nature orders itself.
Mhm.
That's really it. We're not exploring the chaos necessarily. We might be sifting through some of it.
Which, yeah, to a testament of music in that way, it's why, like, if we break it down to the atheist level philosophy, why would geometrically sound music sound better? There's no reason in the chaos of nature for that to appeal to us, you know, thinking monkeys. Like
Mhm.
even in even in our evolutionary thing, there's no advantage to those notes sounding good, but they do. And they existed before we were able to appreciate their existence. In fact,
Right.
fucking other mammals like those noises for some reason. Um, so that's there is a direction, right? There's something. There is something to put parameters on. Like if there wasn't some kind of thing we could say, okay, maybe this,
Mhm.
that wouldn't exist at all. Like it,
No, it's true, and it's quite in depth. I mean, I haven't researched this as much as I probably would like to. I don't know how much study there is about it in general, but so in Western tonal music, there are 12 basic keys, the major and minor keys. And there's modes and all those things, but like it boils down to the two distinct major and minor sounds. Happy versus sad. If you
Mhm.
really, really boil it down.
Unless you're God,
Um,
then they're the same.
it's all sad.
Happy sad.
I'm so sad. Uh, and it's all shoot. Where was I going with that? It all boils down to it, and oh fuck, maybe I lost it. That's okay.
We'll get back to it. So the fact that humans, as mammals that developed specifically along the mammalian like strain,
Mhm.
discovered that frequencies play in a geometrical, which is crazy, geometrical pattern, and those notes sound magical to us, which is weird enough. But even non-conscious, non-sentient mammals respond positively to the geometrical chromatic scale. So, you were describing, okay, so there is those.
And no, it's let's see. I'll come back to it. It usually takes us leaving for a while and it'll just pop right in.
Not
Uh,
necessarily, because like, so yeah, so they exist in nature. They were discovered. That's kind of the thing.
mhm.
But as you're pointing out, there's the Western structure is different than the Eastern structure, and the Western structure is there's the 12 pieces. So what is important about the 12, right?
Oh, so yeah, I remember now. Thank you.
Mhm.
Uh, there you are. So I don't think there's been much study on this, and I would like to try and study more. But the reason we don't have everything in the same key all the time is because each key center has different uh to put it in the 21st century talk, it has different vibes. Pun intended, I guess. But like they all have different.
I had a cheat sheet when I used to produce music of the
Sure.
scales where I was like, I want the song to feel this way. I could pull up a cheat sheet that had
Yeah.
the moods for the
Yeah.
scales.
Yes. Probably the most sentimental one is D flat major. If you want to just hit people in the feels, it's a good one.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Cheesy
Um,
happy is just rock the sea.
oh yeah. C major is just the yeah.
Cheesy happy, not
Oh yeah.
legitimately happy. Cheesy happy.
No, legitimately happy. If you're arriving to happiness, is F major. Uh, if you're starting with happiness, let's see. Yeah, I could go on about this, but yeah,
But the weird thing is, we as Homo sapiens weren't designed to interact with sound that way.
isn't that funny? Yeah.
But yet, after discovering it, we do. The thing that responds to music isn't the intellect, it's the monkey brain, it's the
Uh-huh.
limbic system. That
Yeah.
responds to geometrically clear notes. So it was already in the universe before we could even,
Mhm.
as you would put, listen to it.
Yeah. It's funny because so as cheesy as it is, and it is cheesy, a lot of it is, barbershop quartets are they have a huge following. For if you know, you know, like for those in that musical world, barbershop quartets, it is a cult following. And it is because it is sung a certain way with a purity of tone. A lot of the time, the subject matter is, kind of funny and cheesy and goodbye, my Coney Island baby, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, but usually at the end, it's tradition in most barbershop quartet tunes. At the end, you would hold out, like one person would hold out a note for a stupidly long time. And you sing in such a way that it's a very pure vocal tone.
Mhm.
And, the others would swing around it, kind of do the final cadence type stuff. And they would all lock in on a chord. And if they did it right, they're singing in such a pure way, and they would finally move around, move around, move around, and then lock in on this chord where the harmonic series, which is what you're talking about, the geometric sound of music, uh, would light up with sympathetic vibration. It all stacks on top of itself. So you would hear more notes than the four that are being sung because they're mathematically lining up, causing sympathetic vibration of the air molecules, to put it scientifically. but
Yeah.
you'd hear suddenly like octaves and thirds like pop up out of nowhere, and it would create this. It's the exact meaning of the sum of the parts.
It's
No,
great
what
as
is it?
the whole.
The whole is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yes.
That's what this kind of stuff causes, and that is natural. And maybe I'm biased because I am a musician, especially in the classical vein, but like I find that to be of the highest good. Like we chase that sensation.
Yeah. So to try and keep on topic,
Hmm.
there there has to be outside of uh the truth that all has to be good, right? That's if you dig into it, that has to be true. Has to be. That's useless. Other than for the first step of acceptance and I don't know, sense of peace, because it's not useless. Yeah, for the average person, it's useless. Um, but
Does
that
it feed me? Right.
yeah, no, but it makes you okay with being hungry, which might be better, right? Um, but yeah, so like there's the fundamental everything has to be good, but yet there seems to be maybe we need to like start talking about okay, well, there's everything's good. What makes it better? Maybe that's what we're trying to get at with this. To try and add to the language because the term like the good in a moral sense um, gets trumped by the philosophical and metaphysical concept of good as a standalone with no antonym.
Right. Well,
However,
because the moral, the more earthbound concept of good is the stuff I was talking about with the choices you make, and you have to have a metric for it. And
so maybe it's okay. There, everything's good, but what makes it better? And that's where maybe the whole conversation's at.
it very well could be.
I mean, it doesn't
We
that doesn't sell books and church sermons the same way, but I think that's what people are talking about.
well, yeah, there is. So there's a great quote. I wish I remembered it, but it's from years ago. Um, but it was a quote regarding what artists of any kind call the divine dissatisfaction, right? Like no matter how good you get at something, the bar is ever just you're just brushing the bar with your fingertips at all times.
Mm,
So that divine dissatisfaction of like you're achieving, you're growing, you're doing more, you're accomplishing, not even like personally, just artistically expressing more, reaching that you know that esoteric truth, whatever you want to call it. Uh, but you're never quite there, and that in and of itself, like the journey is the destination.
I think
That whole concept.
it's either Dolly or the other crazy one, but the other
That
contemporary.
narrows it down. Yeah,
Yeah, the other contemporary crazy one that said, "Never worry about perfection; you'll never get there."
pretty much. Yeah. No, that's yeah, I think that was Dali. That sounds about right.
He said more clever things than he actually did, which is a credit to him. Which is a credit to him as a person, so people can right. Like he still said
Yeah.
those things. He worked through the problems.
Yeah. And as far as his output, the stuff he made was quality. Some of it was like I feel like he did so little in comparison to some others, because the logistics of what he was doing probably took longer than most other things.
Mm.
Like with there's the photograph of like what him with the like splashing water and the cat, and he's
Yeah,
jumping and like
no, yeah, and I'm thinking of the other one. Great artists don't create, they steal. That was the guy who did that. The
uh,
Cubist,
Picasso.
Picasso. Yeah, Picasso.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
yes, he did talk about that.
Yeah, no, Dali was the real deal, flaws and all. Picasso wasn't. That's where I was confused. I was throwing shade on Dali. It was undeserved. I mean, he was a monster of a human
Yes.
being, but human beings are monsters. So that's is what it is. Picasso's the one that he was okay.
He had such an output, right? Like that. Of course, some of them are going to be hits.
Mhm. But he doesn't have the quotes that like Dali had awesome quotes. His art pushed boundaries. Picasso kind of just lucked the fuck out. We're
Well,
getting we're getting off topic here.
well, yes, yes and no. Picasso, was he a bad artist? Was he a good artist?
Yeah, okay. Let's dig into that because both of our you're this is where the tables flip because I am not as engaged in the arts as you are, even as a musician, where we've been over like musician and a music artist, there's like a difference there, but you're still very much engaged in the arts as a field compared to me, where I came
Certainly.
into it as a marketer, somebody who has to work with the art and the artist and do something with it. Um, I mean, we're talking about Picasso, so that's good. Uh, but I don't, he pushed boundaries, but not I don't know. Not the way Dolly did, because Dolly was unique. I don't like that word, but in this particular thing, Picasso was doing like
Dali was singular, right? Like,
yeah, yeah, because Picasso was taking half steps enough to be edgy, but didn't have the thing to be self-sufficient as an artist.
sure.
Dali didn't need any context to be himself. Which the trouble with that is that meant he didn't care for context such as laws and morality. But
Right. But we're sticking with the yeah,
so
I guess. Yeah.
this would be a thing, right? So that makes Dali, in the idealistic sense of the artist, somebody who's pulling creativity out of the ether. He's better at that, but a worse human.
Yeah.
Picasso,
So he's a good artist, but a
but
bad
bad human.
person. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
not even a bad human, right? Because like that could be argued that a good artist is a good human, but because like out of the two of them, Picasso, he played the business game of art. Um, so he wasn't a saint. He wasn't pure artist or whatever. Um, but as a person, he found out he could make money from art and he wanted to. He just didn't want to be the starving artist. And he
Mhm.
did have something to say. Um, so he was a better person. He was just trying to do that. He was trying to keep himself fed and wealthy. Like that's not bad. Where Dali would have done anything that wouldn't have gotten him killed, and he would easily probably risk being killed for the proper experience. Right.
True.
So
True. Yeah. I mean, Picasso, you can liken Picasso to someone like, oh, let's see. It's a funny comparison, but hear me out. You can liken Picasso to someone like Warren Buffett. So started out, you know, with talent. He created, did a lot. Warren Buffett started, he had a mind for numbers uh, from day one, all that kind of stuff. Uh, and it was nurtured for sure, and was grown by his family and then by his teachers and all that. Picasso was the same. He had a proclivity for visual art.
mhm.
Uh,
And a sense of pushing boundaries within reason.
mhm. Yeah,
He understood the artist storytelling.
right.
He was still good at
Exactly.
that.
Exactly. So they've done that. They've achieved. Um, they've taken maybe some risk, calculated risk, right? Like,
Mhm.
he pushed like Warren Buffett, right? Warren doesn't take risks really. He
Mhm.
weighs the risk. Everything is a risk, right?
Everything's a risk. Yep.
But he weighs that and has a really good understanding of like this is a decent risk to take.
Mhm.
Picasso was the same way. He's like, well, I'll create this piece. Will it be received well? Hard to say, but based on
Likely.
right, right, it's likely that this will be
Uh,
perceived well. Eventually, they grew so big, like Berkshire Hathaway. I watched some of their their speeches, the conferences that they do once in a while. I'll watch them like speak about certain things, and Buffett and his partner Charlie Munger will talk about how the inevitable question comes up of, if you were to start again, or what advice do you have for young investors, all that kind of stuff, just starting out, blah blah blah. And they inevitably jump on the fact of like, don't do what we do now. Like they genuinely say, like, we don't have advice for young investors because things are completely different now, and they are steering a behemoth of a thing. Berkshire Hathaway is this massive, multi-billion-dollar thing. So they really can't do change very well. They're not designed for that, and they know it. The same kind of happened with Picasso. He grew to such fame that he had this like fixture where he couldn't really, there was no pivoting anymore.
Yep.
If he wanted to stay who he was.
Yep.
Yeah, so he grew too big, and that's not good or bad. That's just what happened.
But
Part
also,
of it was by design. Part of it was by design, though.
yes. Yep.
Yes. And I always think about this phrase. I even forget which movie it was from. I think it was Tombstone. I don't know. It was from a Western I was watching once. And a dad, yeah, the cowboy, the protagonist and his son are traveling with this group of cowboys. I don't know. They're on a caravan or something like that. It's been a while, but I remember the scenario. And the dad and his son are eventually betrayed by the others, and they like steal their stuff, make off in the night, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And the son is pissed. The son's young, and he's just really pissed off. And he's like, "I'm gonna get them, and we should. Why can't we go after them? It's like they clearly went that way, all that kind of stuff." And the dad's just like, "No, son, it's not worth doing that. We gotta just let them go and continue on our path as best we can." The son's like, "But why?" Because the dad was like pretty, for a cliche term, he was pretty stoic about it. And the dad said, "Well, son, you can't blame a man for doing what's right by him." And that, right? Like, like you can't blame a man for they just done what's right by them, or whatever it is the phrase was. But like that notion of what's right by you is good.
Mhm.
And that's what Picasso did. That's what all of us do. But like that's what Picasso did, right? He did what was right by him.
Well,
Therefore, it was good.
he was a commercial artist.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I
That's
don't think he would ever argue that.
no, he wouldn't. Dali wasn't.
Right. Right. The fact that Dali's stuff is on, postcards and and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff
because
is
if somebody said they hated Picasso, he played tough, like, well, you don't understand, but he was like, okay, which critic
right.
said that? Somebody said they hate Dali, he's like, I expect it. Okay, but so
Yeah.
you had an example. So Warren Buffett,
Yeah.
Picasso. So then who's Dali?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I thought you had that in mind. That's why I was asking. You're like,
No,
oh,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So Dali, do I need to think of another investor?
I see that's where you're going with it. Originally, you said Warren, and I thought Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. So I thought that's where you're going. Is that
Oh, that could be. That's the thing. You can find examples for all
yeah,
this,
that
but
Picasso is
right.
Elizabeth Warren, who like rides the train, but Dali was the real deal. Bernie Sanders, who's like, "No, I'm about this." It's like,
Honestly,
oh, well,
that's a
what?
really good example.
Like,
Yeah.
well, we like this kind of stuff. That's nice. Fuck off. Like, Picasso's like, oh, we like this stuff, Picasso, and he's like, well, I'm gonna do this new thing. And they're like, it's not selling. Okay, I'll do the other stuff again.
Right.
You couldn't make Dali do the other stuff again.
Right. But I want to draw a woman who cries ants in the middle of a checkerboard. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a real thing. I've seen it. It's pretty cool.
His stuff is cooler.
Yeah,
Like
it is.
Picasso's work needs explaining for the depth to really sink in. Dali's work is disturbing enough that on the face value it's interesting, and then if you get into it, it's like what?
Yeah. Nope, that's just it. Some modern art is just like that. I
Okay,
always talk about that saxophone quartet I heard in college, where one of my peers raised their hand and kind of went, "I don't get it." The dude just looks at them, says, "Did you hear it?"
hear it?
Yeah. Then you got it.
Priceless.
Yep.
Okay,
And
but
that like that clicks, that stuck with me. I love that.
yeah, that's one of the best quotes ever. Um, this so to bring it back to where we're trying to be, this is the trouble. Once if you either ignore the fundamental truth of goodness or you accept it and then try to build on top of it, then what the do you do? Because even with the direction, right? Even the sense of there's something.
Mhm.
The best art, the good art, comes at the cost of morally corrupt people, right? And the morally good don't do much other than make mundane progress.
Right.
That's and yeah, I'm gonna dig into that for a second because it's something that I thought about a lot. That the unsung hero thing,
Mhm.
that the morally good, the truly morally good, if the majority of the population was that way, would be radical in the way it would change humanity's interactions with each other. The trouble is that's just not a natural state, and it takes a lot of work to just be kind on like an instant by instant basis. And the people who focus on that moral goodness, really holding that as a core thing, don't do much than be background noise that somebody else gets to go like, "Oh, that was so nice," and then they forget about it 3 months later, for the most
Yeah.
part.
No, it's absolutely true. We see that at work all the time as well, you know?
Yeah, but the people that do good in the terms of notable always do it at the cost of some level of moral.
Right. Right. No, it's true. Man, oh man.
So what does that say about good? That to do something epically good means morally bad.
Yep.
Doing something morally great means you're not going to register. And
Right. And if we are talking about the more um outside of nature, outside of the philosophical good, if we're talking
Mhm.
more about the let's call it the psychological good,
Yeah,
uh the perceived good, um it's the tree falls in a forest scenario. If a tree falls in a forest, doesn't make any sound. If a person does good without it being witnessed in some way, perceived, not even witnessed, but just perceived, is it good?
yeah. I think it's a good starting point to like consider it. And that's the trouble is how do you I struggle with it all the time because of my dichotomy between my inclination to be the burn it all down rebel, and the rebel I want to be is a rebel in the direction of the kind-hearted gentleman. But the
So the phoenix is your is your symbol, is what you're saying.
well, and then it's the jump between philosophy and psychology because that's the things I studied philosophy forever and not studied as in reading, studied as in doing. And I realized, oh, you got to really figure out psychology. But then when you figure out psychology, you figure out how much of your efforts are useless.
Yeah. No,
That,
we box ourselves in mentally for sure.
well, it's not just
Like,
boxing. You can people don't change. I don't like that saying because people can, but to pitch somebody to be morally good, legitimately, not because they're afraid of hell, not because they feel guilty or whatever, to do it because it is right for the sake of rightness is wholly unappealing to the human psyche, other than uh, deep satisfaction that hurts more than it feels good. So
yep. And that doesn't jive with a lot of people.
it's not a good pitch. It's not coming from. the I experience art as a marketer coming from that perspective. Marketing saying you're going to do this on the deepest part of your soul. It's going to feel good. In your day to day life, you're going to hate yourself for being that person.
And you know who talked that way a lot? Jesus. Seriously, that's like
You're right.
so. If I can get on this soapbox for 0.2 seconds, so
Yeah,
many Christians piss me off
I
because they
forgot.
miss. Yeah, that's a whole tenet of the Christ philosophy,
Yeah, you it sucks to be good,
right?
except for on the deepest level, and that's where it's.
Yeah,
But I don't know how you could possibly pitch that level of. Yeah, it's
you need the thing is in order to have that be bearable, right? Because you do have to bear it. That's where the Maslow's hierarchy comes back in. Like, if you have to make the rest of life less suffering for that suffering to be
I don't know.
acknowledged.
I don't know if that maybe.
Well, it's a it's a Mansonism, right? Like, you can't give a fuck about everything. So you have to choose which fucks you give. And if you remove some of the choices, essentially, is what I'm getting at. Remove some of your choices of what to give a
Mhm.
fuck about. Because if it's between the greater good and, you know, purchasing a foreclosed house, kicking out the family so I can live there because I need a house, like
God, it's such a mess.
it truly is. No one's denying that. I'll drink to that. I'll have a
Because
LaCroix
people are
for that
denying
one.
it. People are talking about like this is good and that is good, and it's just it's all bad.
Maybe this wasn't the conversation to have on Labor Day before we go back to work.
It just because outside of just accepting it all, it's gonna suck no matter what you do.
Well, and that's where the like take Buddhism for example. That's where Buddhism comes in, right? Is accept it all,
So
accept it all, right?
step one, suffer. Sorry, that's not step one. Step one is accept suffering. You were already suffering. No, I feel
Right.
good. No, you don't.
No, you don't. Are you sure about that? That's the greatest question. Are you sure? Oh, not anymore.
I hate that.
Yep.
Are you confident in that? Well, I don't want to be arrogant, so not anymore.
Right, right. But that's just it. Like, and the Buddhist thing is, eat shit and die, repeat, repeat, repeat until you realize you're eating shit.
And then starve and die instead.
Right.
It
Pretty
all
much.
sucks. It all sucks.
So yeah, I mean it's hard, right? Because biologically speaking, life is a struggle. Like we are a ticking time bomb at all times because we can only live so long and we're trying to do the best we can at any given moment. And we've complicated that issue to the point of no return. Like it is rough. It's rough. It's rough out there.
Well, and if we're looking at through the scientific thing, right? Like if we were built so the concept of goodness comes from I'm gonna get real weird here, but if we're gonna try and break it down philosophically, comes from the single cell organisms that when they took in nutrients, that felt good. But it didn't feel good in terms of happy, right? Like it was fundamentally good. It was just yes, this,
It
right?
allowed you to be more,
But
right?
with no sentiment, it is yes, this.
Mm-hmm.
What created everything else was I'm hungry. I hate being hungry. It wasn't the evolution wasn't moved by yes, this is. It was moved by no, no more. Like
Mhm,
I don't want this. Is what
mhm,
the predatory uh, evolutionary path was. And people can talk about herbivores being, they don't eat, other animals, but they're still carnivores in the sense that they consume another living being because you don't have to do that as a living organism. So even herbivores are murdering other, like they have to consume other organisms. That
right.
whole train came from I don't feel okay. So the entirety of all evolutionary progress wasn't built around the first thing, which is, oh, this is good. First thing, this is good. Boom. I I consume good. How do I consume better? Well, I have to be not like, and again, I'm anthropomorphizing in a way that is wholly new agey,
Mhm,
but the principle stands, at least in a philosophical tenet, that it is the discomfort, the could be better, which
mhm,
means that at the core of us, the the thing that we feel is the most good is that it's just this is good. The rest of our being rebels in a right, but everything else sucks. And
So, yeah.
even when you take in that goodness, it's like, okay, but so the only way this is why I guess it's a good segue from our happiness conversation. The only way to hold on to goodness is to get rid of the buts. But once you do that, you're back in the same trouble of then what? Like,
Mhm, yep.
and the only other alternative to that I can see is accept that it's the philosophical concept of absurdism. It's that we may or may never know what the good is, and it would be better to accept that we're all going to differ, but we all have our own trajectory.
Right.
I
So
got
what this is a bit of a tangent, I guess, but I feel it's an important question because we've discussed happiness, we're on the concept of goodness. Um I struggle with this sometimes if I get too philosophical with myself. How this might be a personal question for you or you can generalize it, but how do you not slip into nihilism? Because like I tend to do that if I go too far in this direction.
because it's useless.
Okay.
That's the only reason. uh, that's it. Because yeah, the when you start digging, this is why I think we talked about this in the happiness. Yeah, we did. I think we talked about this the last episode. Philosophy used to be considered dangerous because you have to dance with postmodernism and nihilism. And if you get stuck in either one of those, it's the worst thing possible because it's saying it's true doesn't mean anything because if that was the point, then nothing would exist at all. So that can't be the answer, right? That can be true. That can be even one of the most fundamental truths, but it can't be the answer to the question that philosophy is asking.
Mhm.
Absurdism, not much better than nihilism, but better. Is that okay? Yes, it's all terrible, suffering, unanswerable, meaningless, but we can keep doing other things. And what do those things mean? Well, depends on who you, depends. Just depends.
Those two words. It depends. Oh
Um,
my god.
but you have to dance with it, and that's why it took me a long time, back to the like jump from philosophy to psychology to understand that asking people to understand philosophical truths is asking people to deal with nihilism who are no way equipped to deal with it because true nihilistic revelation is dangerous. It's really
Mhm.
hard to get out of.
Truly, it's suicidal. Like
Yeah,
it's can be that
I
dangerous.
didn't want to say it, but It's like, well, why not do that? And it's like any answer you give isn't true other than either a theological, well, so no, true. If we're talking true, the only answer is an absurdist answer. Well, you're alive. It's like, okay, but I could just quit. It's like, okay, yes, but if there wasn't a thing to being alive, none of us would be. It's like it's miserable, but you keep saying life needs to be this, life needs to be that. What if it's just a shit show of everything? But the reason you're here is to just be here. It isn't. That's it. Like, well, but that's meaningless. It is, yes.
Correct.
But hear me out. If nature didn't have a direction, not a meaning, not a purpose, but a direction, you wouldn't be. So just keep going. That's it.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, and I mean, there's a whole slew of things with that kind of stuff. And
Mhm. I've
yeah,
I've been down that rabbit hole
sure.
before I found nihilism and after I found nihilism.
Yeah, no, and it's brave of you to say so, and I think it's because so have I, and honestly, so many others have that never talk about it.
Mhm.
So many people have.
It blows my mind when somebody says they haven't, because that's ironically that used to be normal to say you haven't, and it's concerning that either people think they know what true despair feels like, or more people are feeling that. Both of those are concerning. So there's no good thing to people
Yeah,
playing with
my take on it is that it's the latter. More people are in that situation now than have been.
Yeah, I accept that because more people have to face nihilism. That would
Yeah,
be part of my thing.
there's
Is
a lot of there's a lot of machinations in play that you know because we feel empowered and safe when we have control, and there are so many bigger things that are removing our control. I'm not talking politically necessarily. I'm not going to start waving any flags like that, but like
I see,
there
but
are just certain things.
no, see, this is where I would say it's more the danger of these these psychological philosophical concepts being given to regular people, because the peasant class of every era before 19,000 AD lived an insufferable life of minimal control, but they didn't contemplate suicide because they didn't contemplate their place in the universe.
Right.
They accepted it. The trouble is people now have either the luxury or just the misfortune of being introduced to these dangerous ideas of, well, what does your life mean? Well, the average person is like, my life means work and family. There wasn't another option. You could add on God to feel better about yourself, but you didn't have to think about it. And it wasn't in your face. Now it's, well, what are you doing with your life? What is your purpose? What does life mean? Those aren't questions the average person needs to ask themselves.
No, it's true. No, that you're absolutely right. And they are thrusting those questions on younger and younger generations. We had to think about that shit at like you and I, where they made us think about college at what, 16,
Yeah,
15?
and
Like,
I hated it because I was like,
yeah,
ha, you think I'm an idiot now, and you expect me to make a life career decision by
right,
18?
right. And the whole like notion, I call it propaganda of, you know, choose your life's path, choose what makes you happy, choose a purpose that you can succeed
Mm,
at. You know, it's the whole like, do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life type of
yeah.
thing.
Mhm.
And that's just simply not true. It's a good notion. It's nice to think about. It's a good thought experiment. But realistically speaking, I mean, that's just not viable. Hopefully, like if that's the case, then hopefully you're like one of my best friends who just so happens to love math and science, and he became an engineer and really enjoys it
Mm.
and makes really good money doing it. Like hopefully that's your passion then, because mine was music and I don't regret any of it. But
But
but I don't work full time in music. Like, would I like to? Sure, that'd be awesome. That's not a realistic opportunity for me.
mm,
It is for some people. It truly is. But that takes a lot of curating, a lot. Like, you need mommy and daddy money. You got to be in the right place at the right time. Like there's a whole lot
Mm.
of stuff to being a full-time musician that is just not available for most of the populace.
Yeah, yeah. And even for all those that are equipped, it's still the most competitive.
It truly is. And we found out over the past few years that it is not even the most stable. You could be a full-time tenured musician in an orchestra, let's say. And if COVID happens, the Met Orchestra in New York, the highest paid, most performing orchestra in the country is the Met Opera Orchestra in New York. They perform 6 concerts a week. Like it's nuts.
Jeez.
Yeah, it is absolutely insane. Maybe that's a high number, but like they perform more than anyone else, and get paid more than anyone else, uh, for obvious reasons. And a lot of them, it went away. It simply went away. And you know, the highest paid musicians in the most like cultural hub of the U.S. arguably, uh, were on somewhere on welfare, like that kind of shit.
Mhm.
Like, yeah,
Right.
it's a
So,
whole.
all right, let's try and combine the two because we were talking about happiness the last episode, and
Uh,
there was a
and we
tangent.
could. I don't think anyone would argue that happiness is good, right? Like,
I, I
ooh,
editing.
let's do
Hold on. Editing the video, I distinctly say your happiness is irrelevant, so
it.
or non-significant, something to that effect.
Okay, okay.
But to the average, but this is my point: is that what is fundamentally true is not important to the average individual, and that's my growth as a person.
And I rescind that happiness is good because zebra cakes make me happy, but being a fat piece of shit does not make me happy.
uh, See, right? And that's depends on what kind of happiness you're talking about. So it depends what kind of good you're talking about.
Right.
Um, but I think you've told me that story, I don't know, 5, 6 times now about that movie, which we should probably figure out what that is because I think it's kind of the key here. You have to accept that what you consider good isn't what other people consider good and find the solace in that.
Mhm.
Because if you're going to try to argue what is fundamentally good, it's everything. But if you're going to choose subjective good, which you should, because say, yeah, I'm not going to get into the trouble with being an actual accept all truth philosopher because the average person doesn't need that fucking stress.
It's not useful. It's not useful to us.
No, not to the to anybody who other than somebody who chooses that miserable path. Um, but for the average person, like you take on a concept of good. Ah, there's a lot of notion to impose that upon other people, and I get that because you have to have that level of conviction to some degree. Um, but you kind of have to just uh, this might be one of those know yourself things because you have to pick outside of what's good across a society, a community. What do you find good that like clicks together? So, like for you, right, music, you see as good, and I think maybe we should have you lean into that a little bit because that's whatever the goodness that you see in music is the goodness that the average person should look for in their life. I mean, there's moral good, and you can make cases for that as far as society would be better with more, I don't know, morality or whatever it is. But which I agree with. It's just that's a tricky thing. But I think for the average person, just understanding what's good not for them in like a serial killer kind of way, but good for them as in it's my concept of stir, which we'll get into another time. But there is this thing. It just the whole all nature has its big path, There's this like little one that's the good path for you. I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Sure.
And you're somebody who has found that. So I think maybe your experience with you had every other choice of whatever you wanted to do, but you said this, you found this thing, you're like, this is good. Why?
Okay. All right. Let's do that. I chose, so I'll talk from my experience, right? Because that's really all I have.
Hmm.
Uh, Obviously, the study of psychology allows me to perceive the experience of others, but really all I have is mine. So
Hmm.
I'll use that. Uh, so I chose to pursue music for various reasons. Um, the main one, kind of the earliest one, was the fact that I was good at that and not much else. You know, I became a decent writer, in English, whatever. I don't know. I was pretty good at that. I gained an interest in history, although I was not good at social studies or I'm a good learner, but a shitty student is how I kind of describe it. Um, Math and science, I rarely had interest in. I was interested perhaps in the results of those things, but not like doing them.
Hmm.
Uh, so kind of it all kind of felt like it kind of fell into, well, music's the thing that I'm good at. Like I don't have to think too hard to produce a uh quality, product. um could it have been better? Yes, always. Like that's just the thing. But like I'm not saying I was a good musician right off the bat, but I was good at music in comparison to my own life of everything else. Like I grew to be, through bitter work, a black belt martial artist. I'm a good martial artist, or at least I was out of practice. But that took. I was like a flabby, just soft little boy, like no gumption whatsoever. So it took a lot of work for it to click. Um, so music didn't necessarily take a lot of work. I worked hard, but not in the beginning. Like it didn't take, you know, the choice of like I'm bad at this and I need to be better or else. It
Yeah.
was like,
And that's the thing, right? Because it's like you're like, oh, I was good at music. You're good at practicing, which what?
right. No, I wasn't. I rarely practiced. That's the thing. I remember there was these like practice sheets you had to fill out of like how many minutes, 20 minutes a day or whatever.
Oh, I remember
I
those.
I didn't do jack shit, and my mom just made me do like an hour every few days, and she would mark down 20 minutes for like 3 days.
Math checks out.
Yeah, that's kind of how it went. Um, but really, what it was is that I just felt more myself in the band room, that kind of thing. Uh, I felt like I was able to contribute in a positive manner to the greater sum of things. My part played a role in the sum of the whole. Uh,
So to distinguish, like you still put in a lot of work in the martial arts. What was the difference, as best you can describe, of the
yeah,
sensation between being in the martial arts versus that band room satisfaction of?
yeah, that's a very good question, and one that I think about a little bit here and there. Let me skip. I'm going to skip to high school, and because that's like more of the martial arts and the music combined stuff.
Mhm.
I started martial arts when I was 14. I think I was in eighth grade. Yeah, yes, I was. I was in eighth grade when I started that. So I'd been in band since fifth grade, but it's just been another thing I did. So get to high school where it actually started getting serious. Um, I almost didn't go into music in high school because in eighth grade they take the middle schoolers to go witness the marching band, and high school marching band in my high school is competitive, so they travel around and compete against other marching bands. So it's not about the halftime shows, it's not about the parades. They do those, but those are just kind of uh, check
Mhm.
boxes. What it really is competition. So it is, you know, uh, it is working very hard towards a goal of being the best you can possibly be as a group. So the fact that it's this weird dichotomy that I think about to this day because I work with them as a staff member now. And it is about talking about making the art, which is a very individual thing, but also enforcing uh, conformity, which is hilariously juxtaposed.
Mhm.
That's absurd, isn't it? Like, it's an art, but do it this way.
I
uh,
mean, nobody in the East would say that that's weird.
right, right. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, absolutely. Um, which I have a whole thing about Bruce Lee that I'll get into later. But because he is he's that synergy of both. But anyways,
Mhm.
um, that's when I started taking private music lessons. Like I was naturally pretty good. I enjoyed it. Is really what it came down to. I thought I'd give it a try. Like I think my grandma was like, "Just try it. You can always quit." It's one of those kinds of like
But you
maybe
enjoyed martial arts too, right?
I did. So I enjoyed that because I like swords and like
So
from a young age.
that was cool.
Yeah, it was.
The other thing felt good.
Yeah, yeah. So the martial arts thing was it's this weird juxtaposed thing, right? Like, yeah, the band thing felt good. It was fun. I was in a group. I was a member of a group that did a thing, and I was a main contributor to that group. My voice added to that.
Mhm.
It was a very communal type thing. And I grew to be a leader within that group, which is its own, kind of also feels good.
Mhm.
Uh, in the martial arts, I was uncoordinated, uh, lanky. I was skinny fat. I still am in a way, but uh, like I had not much toned muscle. Like a lot of my friends were athletes. I was not. I was not an athlete when I was in middle and high school. Uh, and I didn't have much confidence really. Um, so it kind of grew to just like it's a strange thing. So you know how there are people that are just angry and violent and they get in fights a lot, and
Mhm.
you know there are lots of those. We all know somebody like that. It's just that way. People are like that, and it's one of those things. I got to be I'm known as a pretty zen dude in my friend circle. Um, not because I practice zen so much. I'm actually not a good zen practitioner,
That's
but
you also define Zen by its literal definition, but moving on.
yeah, 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 fine. I'm not a I'm not a uh, traditional Zen practitioner, I guess. I don't
But
know.
you know what that means. So.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I can't afford the retreats to Sri Lanka. I'm not a real Buddhist.
Look at all that hair.
Right. um, but it's one of those things. I grew to a point where it's this strange thing. I was very peaceful and kind of yeah, I had that vibe about me because I was I was a warrior in a garden and not a gardener in a war. Do you know
Mhm.
that phrase? I think you've used that phrase before.
Yeah, it's one of
Yeah.
my favorites.
Yeah, yeah. So it's because if anyone started getting uppity, if I was bullied, and I was bullied once in a while, um, it didn't it doesn't bother you when you know how to like this is gonna sound very serious, and I don't mean for it to be sounding so serious.
So we're just talking about the nature of goodness and
Right,
reality.
right. But maybe not serious, but it's gonna sound like psychotic when I say it out loud. When you know how to kill someone,
Mhm.
it they're not gonna bother you as much.
Well, because you know a level that you know they're not ready for.
Yeah,
That's what that comes down to.
yeah,
Because they're
that's
like,
really it.
somebody's ready for a fight, you're like, I'm ready to die or kill.
Right,
We're not the same.
right. That's just it. That's just it. Um, and I'm still trying to find that level in music.
But this is the thing, right? So okay, the theme that you've talked about so far is just
Here, let me. Well,
yeah,
if you have it.
it's
So
your
so
thing.
it's kind of the two parts of it are. So music,
Mhm.
I enjoy being a part of the whole. Martial arts, I enjoy my own personal achievement.
Well, you were part of a dojo, right? Like you were part of a tradition, a
Sure,
team,
sure, but I didn't do it for the dojo. I did it for me.
and you did the music for the team.
Yeah, I love more than anything else. I fucking hate doing solo recitals. I had to do them in college. I'll have to do them again sometime, I'm sure. I don't like to do that because it makes it about me. I want I want to be a part of the grand orchestra, the big wall of sound that hits somebody. I don't want to be the singular laser that hits somebody. That's and it's I don't know if it's an ego thing. It's part of it is my instrument. Like it's not a great solo instrument.
Riker. Moving
It
on.
can be. It can be. Like there's tastes. And now we're getting into tastes, and that's a
Yeah,
whole,
but
whole other
we're talking about your experience of that's the thing that outside any other moral compass you have, that you identified goodness in your life. As long as you're doing music, life is good, right?
essentially, yeah. So in music, I'm a Spartan in a shield wall. In martial arts, I'm a gladiator by himself in the arena, right? Like
But
that's where I get my
that right. But my major point is that if because I know this from professional conversations with you in our like same job, as long as you're doing the music, regardless of your any other circumstance, life's good.
yeah, yes. I can
Like
say
maybe
that
not
without hesitation.
maybe
Yes.
not great, right? Maybe not, not that it doesn't not suck, right? But it's good. It's got that essential quality that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was gonna argue against you on kind of the concept because I picked philosophy, which felt very individual until I realized this is what philosophy looks like to me, and I can only do this with somebody else.
Gotcha. I will let me jump on one thing before we go away from it. Well, not that we go away, but before we continue. Uh one singularity that I have found that fits both of my lives in
Mhm.
that way, both topics that we just talked about. One thing that I find profound meaning in, especially sometimes it's not fun, sometimes you don't feel anything, but you still do it, is teaching, helping others
Mhm.
to find their own uh, development, to helping others to excel in whatever field you're doing, and helping them find their own empowerment. I think is the best way to
Yeah,
describe it.
I
I do that both in martial arts and in music. I love teaching both of those things.
and I would love to learn more about that because I have a sneaking suspicion that most people would find a deep satisfaction in that, regardless of what the field is.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so like I didn't use my own example, so I was like, I had that in the back of my mind as you were going through yours.
Mhm.
But I really wanted to know because, like, yeah, no, I've had a bunch of interests too, and I liked music, but I never. I guess that's my personal interest, right? Is I liked music, but I never clicked with it, and it was the good thing because I love music. You know that because like I spent all day listening to pre-classical music because I just wanted to experience it. I love music that much, but it was never the good thing, right? Like
Yeah.
I have spent time on philosophizing and philosophy in the face of whatever, and I did most of that alone. Um, but I never felt alone. that, which I think that might be part of the important thing. I always saw myself as part of philosophy.
Hmm.
I was never a philosopher, right? Like it was just people worked on this problem. I was just jumping in because I saw all these guys throughout history. Like I heard, to me, I saw myself more like a fighter, right? Like I saw all these epic fights of Tyson and Ali and stuff like that. Like I want to get into punch some shit. Like yeah, like let me try to work this out. But it wasn't like so that seems very individual. But like in the span of the art, what made it satisfying wasn't I felt like I was doing it. It was because I hopped into this lineage of fights that
Hmm.
had happened, and I had never thought about that consciously. I know I thought about it uh, as an experience as it was happening, but until you kind of talked about that, where it's like the Spartan thing, but like that there was a satisfaction that was there that was different than the satisfaction of just kind of being a badass for the sake of being cool, not cool in a bad way, but like I did martial arts too. Like I did
Right.
whatever, and I love it. I still, I do bodybuilding casually, but that's not my good thing. Uh,
Right.
but it feels cool. It's got this self thing that I do like, but it's not the
Hmm.
same thing where it's like if I was left with just that for the rest of my life, I wouldn't be sustainable. If you left me with the ability to be a beggar on the side of the road, but you gave me the opportunity to talk to people about philosophy, my soul would survive.
Yeah. And that's really what it boils down to. Like, what will you suffer for? If it came down to it. Not that you should have to. You shouldn't
Right.
have to, but
Right.
if you have to.
But it's weird that because I hadn't considered this until you talked about it. There's a fitting your piece in to a greater puzzle,
Yeah.
which I think might be the trouble is I don't know how much you thought about that consciously because I definitely didn't until we started talking about it.
Yeah, not I didn't necessarily, but I am now. And I get it because like that's why a lot of people teach is like
Hmm.
that's their that's where their piece fits is to continue the lineage of knowledge or helping people, self actualize or whatever it is,
Right.
because if you can't, that's kind of one of the things of if you can't be the next Mozart, you can raise the next Mozart, and that's your own sense of if you're doing it for personal reasons, like that's your own sense of like accomplishment.
I don't even know if you can think about it that way. You're part of the world of Mozart.
Yeah,
And that
that's true.
if there hadn't been a world for Mozart to go into, there wouldn't have been Mozart. It's not you're trying to raise the next Mozart. It's just you're keeping that world alive, and that's
Yeah,
enough.
I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is a professional dancer. He does modern and traditional African dance, and we were discussing our art forms. He had just finished a project and everything, and I, I kind of he wasn't ready for me to say this. He kind of freaked out for a second, but I was like, "Isn't it funny that our two mediums, music and art, or music and dance, are the only two art forms that really only exist as you're doing them?" And he's just like, "Oh shit." Yep. Uh, but it is, and that's the thing. Like, it's just ink on a page, or a sequence of steps, whatever it is that music is not the ink on a page. Music's been it's been around longer than that, much longer than that. Uh,
Well, it's not just the notes being played as they are, right? Because that's a machine can recreate
yeah,
the sound, but
right,
not the experience.
exactly right. So like, Beethoven doesn't exist until we're playing the Ninth Symphony. Like,
Mhm.
and then he only exists as we're playing the Ninth Symphony. The Ninth Symphony only exists when it's experienced. It's
Mhm.
not, and of course there's recordings and all that stuff. But I'll argue that the art form is the recording and not the thing being recorded.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. We're not going to bag that box tonight.
Yep, yeah, that's a whole for future reference. Yeah, but that's just it. It's one of those things, and you know, I find great, I don't know if satisfaction is the right word for it, but like you feel a sense of wholeness when you're doing this kind of stuff. At least at a high level. If you're struggling to do it, this is why some people don't continue in music because they, that's why it takes practice in anything. If you're struggling to operate, if you're struggling to execute, then you're not achieving necessarily the level that the art is for. If I'm explaining that right.
Yeah, but this is my point that I made really early on, where it's like you chose two disciplines that only become anything with hours of practice.
Yes.
And you chose to do both, but only one was the thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's the thing. Because I couldn't be bothered to practice music. Like that's was my downfall in my whole music career. I
Mhm.
love I love music. I love it with a deep and uh like appreciative fashion, but I could not be bothered to suffer through practice.
That's fair. That's fair enough. That's absolutely fair. Even I practiced a little bit today, and I have a hard time with it now. I really do. In college, I think I had there was the expectation one, there was the outside pressure,
Mm,
uh, but also just you're in the environment where it's what you do is you practice. you know,
yeah.
uh, right now it's not necessarily what I do. I've skipped multiple days this past few months.
Okay, but after years of doing it,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
you,
still do it. Like I still, whenever I pick up the instrument, it's with a purpose. It's not just to
mm.
have fun.
Okay,
Yep.
so I think there's one gap we're missing. And I mean, we could just do a part two. I don't know. There's only episode two. We're still figuring this whole thing out.
That's true.
Uh, there's philosophical good, which is everything, and people can fuck off if they disagree with that because it has to be. It has to be.
yeah.
Skipped a step. Thing three is in your own life. There is something that, like I said, there's the atheist, deist, whatever, that nature has a flow, and in your life there's a mini one. Within that, there's something that's just it's right. It's just
Mhm.
feels good in a way that other things don't. Um, what we're missing is thing two. When most people talk about good, they're talking about moral good, and
Mhm.
unfortunately, we agreed on the first part, skipped the second part, and start talking about the other thing. I think we've just kind of bypassed the whole concept of what's morally good. Um,
Yeah, and I think that was partially on purpose, because we know that's a huge bucket of worms. I,
which
I kind of I kind of skipped it and kind of didn't. We talked about it a little bit of like, so my definition of the moral stuff is that comes from the choices we make. You have to have a metric
but
for
but
what is
what
good.
but what's the compass that you or what's the thing you weigh the choices against? That's where it gets tricky.
It does because you could make, I, yeah, I'll say it this way: you could make the choice that anything that doesn't fall into the good quadrant is bad, is
Hmm.
not good. You could argue that good could be it could be a like a scale, right, or a spectrum. That's the better word. Good
Hmm.
could be a spectrum. Some things are more good, some things are still good but less good, and eventually there comes a line where it crosses into bad.
But
Like,
how does is it entirely like religious and cultural to define that quadrant? I think that's the part where we might have not been at all talking about because of my sentiment of philosophical truth, and then just the fact that both of us are interested in not trying to find what's morally right because of it, but trying to find what's the right way to live, which is living good,
mm,
which is the finding that mini flow, right?
yeah,
That's maybe this is what we stop this one and we'll go into morally good as its own thing.
yeah.
Possibly if we talk about what's bad.
I was actually gonna talk about like, yeah, we should maybe stop where we are,
Yep.
so that because when we start talking about morals and ethics, we're gonna create a dichotomy. So that's where we're gonna
Yeah.
talk about that.
So I wasn't sure if we were going to talk about badness separate from good, but we actually talked about good on two levels of the philosophical thing, and then the morality actually doesn't matter. I know that's people that want to make that their personality get upset, but if you're doing that flow thing, you don't really care.
No,
You don't.
you
You'll,
don't.
you'll do whatever morality is necessary to keep doing that flow.
You know who embodies that perfectly is the fictional character of Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, yeah, that's yeah, like it. Yeah, 100%,
Yeah.
100%.
No, he needed the reason John Watson was around isn't because he was necessarily useful. Like Holmes kind of did everything. It was fine.
Mhm.
But Watson was the moral grounding for Holmes.
Which he knew he needed
Yeah.
because he knew he didn't want to be a villain because he knew exactly this that the entire universe must be good. However, there is a direction which he observed through his madness induced genius. Like there is a direction. He also knew he was too close to the the truth of it all being good to make that judgment. So he picked up somebody to help steer him within the parameters.
Right.
But his whole focus, and I think this is where we're kind of getting at, is like people worry about what's morally good. And I think you mentioned really early on that that's kind of a side effect. And I think you really that might have been I kind of brushed off at the beginning, but when we're thinking about it, that might be the way to look at it is focus on accepting the good as a whole, finding the good in your your flow, and that'll guide you on to what is morally good. Because if you're not in your good space, it doesn't matter because if you're outside of that, it's not okay.
Mhm.
You're going to fight against it. It's going to disrupt you. You're going to disrupt other people. You got to find that good thing in your life and then work around that.
Yep. Yeah. So, okay. So we should do this next week because I just started chapter one of a famous book called Flow.
Ah,
Yeah. You do
yes.
know this one? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course I know.
By the author whose name is so Polish, I won't even try because
Mhm.
I will botch it so badly.
Oh, I regret every day it gets brought up that I haven't read it with my relation to Stir.
Sure.
Uh, but yes.
So
So
I'm going to try and read as much of that as I can in the next week because I think that will help the conversation immensely because we're definitely starting to talk about that topic. So, because in the introduction, he discusses it's so funny. I started reading it after our happiness discussion, and
mhm.
that's exactly like all the shit we just talked about. He just talks about in the introduction. I'm like, oh, where has this been? Where have you been my whole life?
And that would be Stir shit, which we're saving for much later.
I would love an episode on Stir in particular. That would be
Mhm.
awesome.
All right. I don't know what we're doing for the next episode, but I think
Morals, good and bad.
so bad. We'll do bad because bad is defined by good. Because we were able to define good without bad in two ways.
That's true. So we're on to bad. This
We're
is
on to bad.
this
Oh,
will be the bad episode.
next is ugly. All right. Cool. What that means is, yeah, we did happy, good, bad, we'll probably do ugly, right.